There were exactly 4 seconds of silence after I placed the ring on their table. For seconds where neither of them moved, breathed, or blinked. Forks froze midair. Wine stopped swirling in their glasses. Her eyes met mine, wide, electric, guilty. His hand was still resting on hers. Then she whispered my name like it hurt her throat to say it. Ellis. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. That ring said everything. I turned around, walked out the way I came, and let the heavy restaurant door close behind me like a final chapter slamming shut. Here's the thing no one tells you. You don't really feel anything at first. Not anger. Not heartbreak. Just a kind of numbness that presses against your ribs, like your lungs forgot how to hold air. I sat in my car for a while after that. Not crying. Not yelling. Just sitting. The overhead light still on. The car engine off. My fingers still trembling from how tightly I'd been holding that little piece of metal. A ring. A stupid, meaningless ring now. I'd left it on the table between them, not thrown, not tossed, placed. Gently. Like it was a gift. Because it was. It was the last thing I had left to give her. An ending. The only question now was how long she'd been riding it behind my back. I wasn't supposed to be at that restaurant. Let's be clear. She told me she was going to her sister's for dinner. I believed her. Of course I did. Because believing her had always been easier than doubting. I even packed the stupid Tupperware of cookies she baked earlier, thinking they were for her niece. They weren't. They were sitting on the table when I arrived. Between 2 espresso cups. Homemade. Chocolate chip, half melted. She baked for him. The only reason I ended up there at all was because I forgot my wallet at the gas station and circled back home to grab it. That's when I saw her text, the one she thought she deleted. It was still on her smartwatch, charging on the nightstand. Tables reserved. Wore that dress I like. That dress. The black one with the low back. She never wore it for me. I sat down on the bed, stared at the message for maybe 10 seconds, and something in me cracked open. I didn't throw things. I didn't call her. I didn't scream. I just stood up, got in the car, and drove straight to the restaurant. Like a man walking into his own funeral. And there she was. Candles lit. Her back arched in laughter. His hand stroking her wrist like they were in some French film. Her wedding ring still on. I didn't say a word. Didn't make a scene. Just walked over, pulled mine off, the one I hadn't removed in 11 years, and placed it right there beside their dessert. And now I'm here. Writing this on my phone in a grocery store parking lot, parked 3 spots away from a family loading juice boxes into the trunk of their SUV, trying not to break apart in public. I don't know what hurts more, that she cheated, or that she looked surprised when I caught her. I wish I could say I drove straight home after I walked out. That I handled it with dignity, stayed calm, called a friend, maybe cried into a pillow like some quiet-hearted gentleman in a sad movie. But that's not what happened. Because this wasn't a movie, and I didn't feel like a man anymore. I felt like a stranger in my own skin, like I'd been living in someone else's life without realizing it. I drove aimlessly for a while, through streets I didn't recognize. I ended up in a part of the city I hadn't been to in years, the industrial side, where the streetlights flicker and no one's pretending to be happy. It felt right. Like the city knew exactly how broken I was and decided to reflect it back to me. Somewhere between a closed auto shop and a boarded-up bookstore, I parked. I leaned my head against the steering wheel and finally let the silence break. I didn't sob. I just exhaled, one long, collapsing breath. That was the first time I realized I hadn't been breathing properly since I saw her. Since I saw them. You know what's weird? I wasn't even thinking about what she did with him. Not the physical part. What shattered me more was the way she looked at him, soft, engaged, alive. Like the Juniper I hadn't seen in years had somehow returned, for someone else. And the cookies. God, the cookies. She made them from scratch. Her old recipe. The one she used to make when I had a rough week. It wasn't just a date. She was comfortable with him. She baked for him. She knew what he liked. She dressed for him. She lied to me so easily, that I started wondering how many times she'd done it before. It was around 10 p.m. when my phone buzzed. 10 missed calls. 3 voicemails. All from her. The first voicemail was quiet. Just her breathing and then hanging up. The second one was her whispering, "Ellis, please call me. Please. I need to explain." The third was louder. Harsher. "You ambushed me. You had no right to show up like that. Can we please talk? Just call me. Please." I didn't call back. Instead, I drove to the beach. It was cold, windy, completely deserted. The kind of place you go when your soul needs to scream, but your mouth won't open. I stood there, staring at the waves, wondering how many people had stood in that exact spot feeling just like me. Tricked, discarded, hollow. That's when I saw the older man. He was sitting on a bench, alone, nursing a small bottle in a brown paper bag. Normally, I wouldn't have said anything, but tonight wasn't normal. I sat down beside him without a word. He looked at me, eyes like glass, and said, "You too, huh?" I nodded. I didn't even ask what he meant. We just sat there, two strangers united by heartbreak and salt air. After a while, he told me something I'll never forget. The worst part isn't that they find someone else. It's that they become someone else. And you're left wondering if the person you loved ever really existed. We didn't talk after that. We didn't need to. I left him there, his bottle half finished, and I went home to an empty house that no longer felt like mine. The bed still smelled like her shampoo. The picture of us on our wedding day was still on the shelf. The cookies she baked were in the fridge. I threw them out, not out of rage, just because I couldn't stand the thought of them sitting there, sweet and soft and fake. And now I'm sitting at the kitchen table, writing this, wondering what I'll do when she comes home. Because she will. And I honestly don't know what I'm supposed to say when she walks through that door and pretends this was all some mistake, when the truth is, I'm not even sure I was ever really her husband. It was almost midnight when the front door opened. I didn't flinch. I'd been sitting in the dark for over an hour by then, at the edge of the living room couch, motionless, watching the little light above the microwave blink like it was counting down to something. The only other sound in the house was the slow tick of the hallway clock. She didn't even call out my name when she entered. Just the soft click of her heels on the hardwood and the faint rustle of her coat sliding off. That was it. Then her voice came, casual, too casual, from the hallway. "Ellis? You awake?" Awake. That word nearly made me laugh. She stepped into the living room, finally noticing the darkness. I heard her switch flick, but the lamp didn't come on. I'd unplugged it. She froze. I could see her silhouette clearly now, backlit by the hallway light, standing a few feet from me. Still in that dress. Her hair still styled. Her lips faintly smudged from whatever lipstick she'd worn to impress him. Her eyes finally adjusted. She saw me, sitting there like a ghost in his own home. She gasped quietly, almost startled. "You scared me," she said, pressing a hand to her chest. Then, after a pause, "I've been trying to reach you all night. Why didn't you call me back?" I didn't answer right away. I just tilted my head slightly and studied her. Like I was seeing someone I didn't know. A woman who'd walked in wearing my wife's skin, but whose soul had gone missing. She looked down, probably expecting me to shout, to demand, to accuse. But I didn't. Instead, I asked quietly, "What did you toast to?" Her eyes flickered up. "What?" "At the restaurant," I said, my voice steady but cold. When he raised his glass, "What did you toast to?" She didn't answer. So I asked again, "What did you celebrate, Juniper? Was it your lies? The fact that you pulled this off for who knows how long without me noticing? Or was it just the thrill of having him while your husband waited at home reheating soup like a fool?" "I didn't plan for you to," she started. "No." I cut her off. "You planned for me not to know. That's the difference." Her mouth opened, but I saw her hesitate. That's when I knew she had no prepared story. No script. She hadn't expected to get caught. Not like that. Not with the ring. Not with me just standing there like a bad dream. "I didn't sleep with him," she blurted. I actually laughed. Not because I believed her, but because the words felt so hollow, so absurdly tiny in the face of everything I'd witnessed. "You didn't have to," I said. "That's not the betrayal, Juniper. It's the way you looked at him. The way you didn't look for me. The way you planned it like it was normal. Like I didn't exist." She finally stepped closer. "Ellis, please. I made a mistake." "It wasn't." "No," I interrupted. "This wasn't a mistake. A mistake is forgetting your umbrella. A mistake is mixing up someone's name. You reserved a table. You wore that dress. You baked for him. You left your ring on the entire time like it was some kind of sick accessory. This wasn't a moment of weakness. It was a routine." That word hit her. I saw it. Her shoulders dropped. Her face twisted into something I couldn't quite read. Guilt or irritation or shame. Maybe all of it. "I was lonely," she said finally, voice trembling. You stopped seeing me. You were always tired, or distracted, or just quiet. I felt like I was living with a ghost." Now that stung. Because I had been quiet. I had been tired. I had been worn down from holding up everything for so long that I didn't notice she'd let go. But that didn't make it okay. So I said what I'd been holding in for hours. You could have told me. You could have screamed at me. You could have left. But instead, you chose this. You chose to lie. And now you want to patch it up with excuses like this is some sitcom misunderstanding. She walked closer and tried to reach for my hand. I pulled away. Don't, I said. Don't touch me like I'm still yours. And just like that, I stood up and left her there in the dark, the same way she'd left me long before I ever walked into that restaurant. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the guest room staring at the ceiling, listening to every creak in the house, every floorboard she stepped on. At one point, I heard her sobbing quietly in the bedroom. And maybe, in some corner of my stupid, aching heart, I wanted to comfort her. But I didn't move, because I couldn't tell anymore if I was grieving her or grieving the version of her I'd made up in my head. The next morning felt unreal. The sun came up like nothing had happened. Birds chirped. The neighbor's sprinklers turned on at exactly 6 a.m. The world outside our windows carried on as if it wasn't holding the shattered remains of a marriage just beneath the surface. I hadn't slept. I didn't even pretend to. I spent the night staring at the wall, thinking in circles, each one sharper than the last. I kept hearing her voice in the dark, not her words, just her voice, and it made my stomach turn. I didn't talk to her. I heard her moving around upstairs. The sound of a drawer opening. A zipper. Maybe she was packing. Maybe she was pretending to get ready for work like nothing happened. The absurdity of that made me laugh into my pillow. She had no idea how far this went, how deep I'd already gone into the parts of our life she thought I'd never question. Around 7:30, she knocked on the guest room door. I didn't respond. "Ellis," she said through the wood, "can we talk before I go?" "Go where?" "To him?" I didn't say a word. After about 10 seconds of silence, she gave up. I heard her walk away, then the front door opened and closed softly. She didn't slam it. That hurt more than anything, how gentle she was about leaving. Once I heard her car pull away, I got up. Not to chase her. Not to apologize. I was past that. I needed to understand. I needed proof that I wasn't insane, that I hadn't just imagined the quiet erosion of our marriage while she was building a secret life under the same roof. I went into our bedroom. It smelled like her perfume. There was still an impression in the pillow where she'd slept. Or pretended to. I didn't touch anything. I just stood there, scanning the room like a crime scene investigator, until something caught my eye, the shoebox. The old one, buried in the back of the closet behind her winter boots. The one she told me was full of old letters from college. Except it wasn't. Inside the box was a stack of folded papers, receipts, and a small black notebook. I don't even remember sitting down, but I must have, because I was suddenly on the floor with all of it spread out around me like some chaotic timeline of her second life. There were notes, handwritten, in her script, pages filled with little observations and names and places. Some were about me. Some were about him. There was a sketch of a key. One receipt was for a hotel room booked 2 months ago, the same weekend she told me she was attending a women's leadership retreat. But the thing that hit the hardest was the letter. It wasn't in an envelope. Just a folded page tucked in the back of the notebook, almost like she'd hidden it even from herself. At the top it said, "For Ellis, if it ever happens." My name. In her handwriting. My hands were ice. I unfolded it slowly, already knowing it would hurt more than I was ready for. It read, "Ellis, if you're reading this, then everything has fallen apart, and I didn't get to control how. I'm sorry. I know you probably hate me. Maybe you should. I don't know what to say to make any of it make sense, because even I don't fully understand it. I love you. I always have. But somewhere along the way, I stopped recognizing myself. I started needing things I didn't know how to ask for, and instead of facing that, I lied. I'm not proud of it. I'm ashamed. There's someone else. You probably know that by now. I didn't want to hurt you. I told myself I could keep you and still have him, and I was wrong. So wrong. You showed up for me more times than I ever deserved. And all I did was make you feel invisible. I don't expect forgiveness. I just didn't want you to think it was because of something you lacked. You didn't fail me. I failed you. If I could go back. No, that's a lie. Because I didn't stop. And if I really wanted to, I would have. Jay, I didn't move for a long time. Just sat there, holding the letter, letting the weight of those words sink into me. All the pretending. All the partial truths. It wasn't a mistake. She'd planned for this. She knew, deep down, this was going to implode eventually. And she still chose to keep going. To keep me in the dark. That's when I knew I couldn't stay. Not just in this house, in this reality. Something had to change. I needed distance. not to punish her, but to find whatever pieces of myself were still salvageable. So I packed a small bag, just the essentials. I left the letter on the kitchen counter where I knew she'd see it, not as a threat, not as revenge, just a mirror. And then I walked out, this time not with a ring in my hand, but with one final truth. I was no longer the man she could lie to. I didn't slam the door when I left. I didn't want to give her that satisfaction. I didn't want any drama, any final scene for her to remember me by. If she was going to remember me at all, it would be in silence, just like the silence she gave me when she planned nights with someone else while I thought we were still building a life together. I took my keys, my wallet, a few clothes, and that was it. No note, no dramatic speech. Just the echo of my footsteps as I walked out of the house we spent a decade pretending was a home. I didn't know where I was going. That's not a metaphor. I really didn't. I got in the car and started driving with no plan, no destination. I passed the grocery store where we used to argue over brands of pasta. I passed the park where we once sat on a bench and talked about baby names we never used. Eventually, I ended up in the parking lot of a cheap roadside motel about 30 minutes outside town. The kind of place with flickering neon signs and curtains that don't quite close all the way. Perfect. It felt right, somehow, like the emotional version of a busted neon gravel. When I stepped into the room, I half expected to feel something, relief, maybe. But what I felt instead was nausea. I stood there in that dim, stale space and tried to process the fact that my life had split into two, the one I thought I was living, and the one she'd been living beside it. Like parallel lines that were never really meant to touch. I turned off my phone. I didn't want to hear from her. I didn't want to know what she had to say. Words are too easy for people like Juniper. They know how to twist them, how to make guilt sound like regret and manipulation feel like apology. I needed a detox. Not from her, but from the version of her I'd convinced myself was real. The next morning, I walked 2 blocks to a dingy diner with cracked vinyl booths and bad coffee. I sat near the window, stared at my reflection in the glass, and realized I didn't recognize the man looking back at me. He looked thinner, tired, faded, like someone who had been in love with a ghost. An older woman served me without asking what I wanted. "You look like a scrambled eggs and black coffee kind of guy," she said. I nodded. She was right. I ate in silence, occasionally glancing at my phone, tempted to turn it back on. Not because I wanted to talk to her, but because I had this gnawing fear. What if she had some excuse so twisted, so mind-bending, that it would actually work on me? What if she could still convince me that I was overreacting? That's the danger of being the one who loved harder. You end up doubting your own reality just because the other person never shared it. Around noon, I gave in and powered the phone on. 28 messages. 8 missed calls. 3 voicemails. All from Juniper. The text started with apologies. Then explanations. Then pleas. And finally, accusations. The last one simply read, "If you think walking out makes you the good guy, it doesn't. You're a coward." I stared at that message for a long time. And then I replied with just one sentence. "You lost the right to define me the moment you lied to my face." I turned the phone off again and dropped it in the drawer beside the motel bed. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I sat in that room and let the stillness do what it needed to do, heal the parts of me that had been infected by her presence. The part of me that once believed love could survive anything. That night, something strange happened. I had a dream not of Juniper, but of a version of my life without her. It wasn't grand or exciting. I was alone, sitting on a porch somewhere with a cup of coffee and a small dog at my feet. But I was peaceful. And when I woke up, that image stayed with me. It wasn't revenge I wanted. It wasn't even closure. It was clarity. And I was starting to get it. The motel's silence began to feel heavy after 3 days. It clung to me, thick like dust, the kind that settles when no one's opened a door in years. I spent those days in a loop, diner, walk, sit, think, avoid. I'd never realized how many hours were in a day until I had no one to fill them with. But the thing that gnawed at me wasn't loneliness. It was the sense that something was missing, that there was still more I hadn't seen, more I hadn't been told. On the 4th morning, I made a decision. Not out of anger, not revenge. Just clarity. I needed to go back, not to stay, not to argue, but to gather what was left of me. Clothes. Documents. And one question that wouldn't let me sleep. What else did she hide? When I pulled into the driveway, I half expected her car to be gone. But it was there, parked like everything was normal. Like the person who betrayed me was still pretending life hadn't cracked down the middle. I stood at the door for a second, breathing in the moment, then unlocked it and stepped inside. She was sitting at the kitchen table, not surprised, not teary, just there still, like she'd been waiting. "You came back," she said quietly. "Not for you," I replied. "I just came to collect what's mine." There was a long pause. "Then, you could have told me where you were." I looked at her and realized I felt absolutely nothing in that moment. Not hate, not pain, just distance. Like she was a photo of someone I used to know. "I didn't think you'd be concerned," I said. "You were always good at keeping things to yourself." Her face tightened, but she didn't argue. I went upstairs, packed efficiently. I avoided her bedroom now until the end. I walked in slowly, as if the air might still be toxic. The bed was made, too neatly, like she'd been trying to rewrite the past by smoothing out the wrinkles. I pulled open drawers, grabbed what was mine, and then something odd. In the bottom of her jewelry box, under a pair of old earrings, was a second phone. My stomach twisted. It was small, black, older than the one she used daily. I picked it up. It was off. No charger in sight. For a minute, I just stood there holding it, thinking, do I really want to know what's on here? Yes. God, yes. I found a charger in my desk and plugged it in. The battery icon flickered, and for a second I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, about to see the kind of truth no one walks away from unscathed. When it powered on, there was no passcode. Just a lock screen photo of a river. Not our river. Somewhere unfamiliar. Maybe his place. I opened the messages. There were hundreds. And not just from him. There were at least 2 other names. One marked Jared, the other Ben. The earliest thread was almost 2 years old. 2 years. They weren't just flings. These were full conversations, timelines, logistics, memories. Photos. Complaints about me. Lies she told. Places they'd been while I was stuck late at work thinking I was supporting her dreams. One message stood out. It was from 2 months ago. "Jared, you sure he doesn't suspect anything? Juniper, he's a puppy. Loyal and blind. He'll never know unless I want him to. Jared, cruel. Juniper, practical." I dropped the phone. I couldn't move. My heart didn't just break, it folded in on itself, like a collapsing building. She wasn't just unfaithful. She had studied how to manipulate me, how to keep me blind. She had looked me in the eye, night after night, and served me meals with that same mouth, knowing what she'd said behind my back. This wasn't a marriage. It was a performance. And I'd been the understudy to a show I never auditioned for. I picked the phone back up, took screenshots, saved copies. Not for revenge. For truth. For proof. Because I needed to remind myself that I wasn't crazy. That the feeling I'd carried for so long of being invisible, unwanted, slowly erased, wasn't in my head. I walked downstairs with the phone in my hand. She looked up. "What's that?" she asked. "Your other self," I said. "The one you didn't think I'd find." She paled. "Ellis." "Don't." I cut her off. "I'm not here for a confession. I'm here to let you know that I finally see you. All of you. And I'm done pretending you're the woman I married." She tried to speak, but I was already heading for the door. That was the moment I realized I wasn't broken anymore. Just empty. And sometimes, empty is the first step toward peace. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the parking lot of an all-night laundromat with the phone in my lap, still open to that conversation. Her words looped in my head like a broken recording. "He's a puppy. Loyal and blind." I had read it so many times I could quote it backward. And yet, every time I read it again, it hit like the first. She didn't just cheat, she reduced me. Minimized me to something pitiful. Disposable. I think that hurt more than anything, the quiet contempt she'd grown for me while I was still holding doors open and folding laundry just to make her life easier. By 6 a.m., I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to explode. I wasn't going to beg her to explain something that already spoke for itself. But I was going to do something she never expected. I was going to see him. The main guy, the one I saw in the restaurant. His name was Seth. I got it from one of her emails, where she referred to him as S in subject lines like they were running some Cold War operation. I wasn't sure what I was hoping to find, but part of me needed to know what kind of man I'd been replaced with. What kind of man she had risked everything for. Because if he was some charismatic, worldly, faultless human being, then maybe I could at least pretend this wasn't entirely meaningless. I found his address in a rideshare receipt she'd forwarded to herself by mistake. A condo complex in a wealthier part of town. Modern. Clean. Cold. I parked across the street and watched for a while. At 7:15, the building's front door opened. And there he was, jogging out with wireless earbuds in, looking like he was in a commercial for overpriced smoothies. Athletic, confident, smug, and worst of all, completely unaware of what he'd broken. I got out of the car and walked up to the entrance before I could second-guess myself. The receptionist at the front desk looked up from behind her monitor. "I'm here to see Seth Holloway," I said calmly. She smiled. "Unit 405. Do you have an appointment?" "I don't need one," I replied. "He knows me." She buzzed me up. The elevator ride felt like a countdown. I rehearsed everything I might say, then immediately tore it up in my head. By the time I reached his floor, I didn't know if I was going to knock, punch, or walk away. But I knocked. 3 short taps. The door opened halfway, and he stood there with a towel around his neck, still panting from his run. He looked at me with confused eyes. "Can I help you?" I took a moment, measured the space between us. Then I held up the phone. "I'm Ellis," I said. "Juniper's husband." His face changed like someone had drained the blood straight out of it. He didn't speak, just stared. "Thought you should know," I continued, "that she's not just been with you. There's Jared, Ben, and a few others I haven't gotten around to counting." He blinked. "Wait, what?" "She lied to you too," I said. "She made you feel chosen, right? Like you were her secret, her escape, her prize. That's how she operates. But she was never yours, and I was never hers." He stepped back, unsure whether to close the door or keep listening. I looked around his apartment. Sleek furniture, abstract art, no signs of a real life, just decoration. I almost pitied him. "I don't know what she told you," I said, "but I thought you deserved the same truth I got, served cold and too late." He finally spoke, quietly. "She said you were dull, that you didn't notice anything." I almost laughed. She's not wrong. I didn't. For a long time. I turned to leave but paused at the door. "You might hear from her later. She'll probably cry. Blame me. She's good at that. Just don't forget this moment when she does. Don't forget that I stood here calmly while the fantasy burned behind your eyes." He didn't answer. Just stared, stunned. A man who'd suddenly realized he'd never been special, just next. I walked out. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. Because I wasn't competing with him. I wasn't less than him. We were both just chapters in her story, one she never intended to finish. And I was finally done being written by her hand. I didn't go back to the motel. I drove west, past the limits of the city, through places where the trees grew thicker and the signs stopped mentioning anything familiar. I pulled off into a quiet rest area, parked, and just listened to the wind for a while. I wasn't healed, not even close, but I was away. And sometimes, away is the first step toward free. I stayed off the grid for 5 more days. No calls, no texts. I didn't check the news, social media, or even the weather. It was the first time in over a decade that I wasn't tethered to someone else's emotions, someone else's schedule, or someone else's disappointments. I rented a cabin off a county road that didn't have a name. The owner didn't ask questions, just handed me the keys and said, "You look like someone who needs quiet." She was right. The first night, I couldn't sleep. Not because of heartbreak, but because it was too still. No city noise. No vibrating phone. No tension waiting to pounce. I lay awake realizing just how addicted I'd been to emotional noise, to the chaos Juniper brought. It was like being in a house that had always smelled like smoke and only now noticing it was on fire. But slowly, day by day, things changed. I started to breathe differently, slower. I woke up earlier, ate without rushing, took walks without a destination. I didn't realize how badly I needed peace until I tasted it, and it felt foreign, like biting into something you forgot you used to love. By the 3rd day, I picked up a journal from a nearby general store and started writing again. Not for anyone else, just for me. My thoughts were messy, raw, often bitter, but they were mine. Not filtered through someone else's approval. Not shaped to avoid confrontation. Just honest. And then something unexpected happened. A small family, parents and their daughter, maybe 6 or 7, rented the cabin next door. We crossed paths one morning near the lake. The little girl dropped her toy. I picked it up and handed it to her. She smiled and said, "Thank you, mister." It was simple, but something in that tiny moment cracked me open in a way Juniper's apologies never could. Because it was real, genuine, free of manipulation or weight. Later that evening, the girl's father stopped by with 2 cups of coffee and said, "You staying long?" I shrugged. "Not sure." He smiled. "Well, My wife says you have sad eyes, so I'm supposed to invite you for dinner one night. We ended up talking for an hour. Not about relationships. Not about betrayal. Just about life. Work. Favorite books. It felt like plugging back into the part of the world I thought I'd lost. That night, I realized something. Healing doesn't come like a thunderclap. It comes quietly. In strangers' kindness. In coffee that doesn't taste bitter. In finally falling asleep without rehearsing arguments in your head. I never returned to that house Juniper and I shared. I sent her a written notice that I was filing for divorce. No threats. No anger. Just finality. She responded with a single message. I never thought you'd really leave. And maybe that's the saddest part of all, how little she thought of me. But it's also what saved me. Because I stopped trying to prove my worth to someone who never saw it. 6 months later, I'm still in that same cabin, at least for now. I've repainted the porch. I've taken up carpentry. I've joined a community group that hikes every weekend. No, I haven't started dating again. Not yet. But I've started living again. And for the first time in my adult life, I wake up with no weight on my chest. I smile at strangers. I cook meals for myself. I laugh, genuinely. I was never her puppy. I was just a man who loved someone deeply, blindly. And now, I'm a man who loves himself enough not to go back. If you're reading this and wondering if leaving will break you, let me say this. It might. But staying in something that makes you feel smaller will destroy you piece by piece. Quietly. Until you forget you were ever whole. So leave. Let them wonder who you've become without them. And let yourself become someone you actually like.